going on. Okay, we will open the January 24th meeting of the Orono Town Council. Tonight, we are having the Community Development Committee and the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. And the roll call will show that Councilor Grenier, Councilor Wingard, and Councilor Perry are here in council chambers. And Councilor Osher and Councilor Gardner are joining us via Zoom. So let's begin with Community Development Committee meeting and the report on Webster Neighborhood meeting. I think we know who that is.
That is me. I am going to share my screen.
So and Meg, if you by chance, sometimes like last time we were kind of looking at each other and not looking towards you. So if it happens that way, just jump in and say, hey, I got something to say.
Please. Thanks.
Whoops. Let me go to. So I also have Jeff Lowe and Mitch were both at this meeting, but let me see if I can set it up before I talk to you about what happened at the meeting. Town council had heard concerns through the fall, summer and fall from some folks who lived in the Webster neighborhood about feeling unsafe and feeling like the neighborhood was unlivable. Those were the kind of the two words that we continued to hear. And we met, I want to say in October, and council agreed that it would make sense for staff to go ahead and hold a neighborhood meeting to try to get some clarity about what unsafe and unlivable meant and what was contributing to those things. So I actually reached out to council and had 3 counselors interested in helping with this process. Councilor Perry graciously stepped back, and Councilor Wingard and Gardner joined me and my staff in this effort. We elected to use a nominal group approach, which meant that we would invite the community in, and we would go through a process of simply trying to download what the community was thinking about. We, as part of that, sent out invitations. Invitations went to all property owners, all property managers, and also in places where the mail was going someplace other than the street, we sent a current resident invitation. So all total, we sent out just over 200 invitations. I'm sure some of them were probably duplicative, but we wanted to make sure that we reached everybody. So we all met on December 8th. We actually packed in a socially distanced way, council chamber. It was a snowy, nasty night. So we were not thinking that we were going to get the 26 people that had responded that they were coming. We ended up with 31 people from the neighborhood or who were clear stakeholders in the neighborhood. So I've split my slides into a couple of different sections. And the first section I want to talk about is what we learned. Through this process, staff tried very hard not to rebut or describe or explain or try to problem solve. Our goal here was simply to understand what the issues were. And the expectation is that we will be sending this information back in a report to the neighborhood and posted on. So first things that we talked about were issues around safety. Speeding cars. People were concerned that there were speeding cars, vehicles not stopping at stop signs, pedestrians walking in the roadway, sidewalks that were obstructed, that were causing issues for people who were walking or pushing children in strollers or bikers. There was a concern that we needed more or better placed streetlights. And there was a concern about thefts and break-ins in the neighborhood. So understand, the notes, which I will attach as an addendum to the report, are about 8 pages long. And there were probably 80 to 90 specific complaints. Some duplicated each other, but this is my effort to try to compress them into a workable list. From a property maintenance and code enforcement standpoint, people were concerned that properties were not well kept in the neighborhood, that they were in disrepair, that there were piles of brush, debris, bulky waste. There were vacant properties. They talked about a particular vacant home and another particular lot that had been used as a laydown area and looked like a commercial lot in the middle of their residential neighborhood. Some concerns about solid waste management and parking on the lawn or having too many cars in the yard. Noise, parties, disorderly behavior. I will tell you that when we started the conversation, there was, I think, probably a very natural tendency to try to make this a tenant or student versus, and very quickly we were able to kind of separate that, I think. So you're not going to see those delineators here, rather really focusing on the behavior. Pre-COVID parties, handling of noise complaints or lack thereof, noise, vulgarities in the daytime that made people uncomfortable having kids out on their front lawn, late night groups of loud walkers, people walking home from downtown, exceeding occupancy limits within dwelling units, and excessive noise in Webster Park. There were some issues expressed around town-owned property, how we maintained Webster Park, trees, invasive plants, parking, etc. Lack of sidewalk in areas that feel dangerous to walk on the street. The condition of roads and sidewalks. The need for a four-season path through Martin Park. And the fact that the old school lot needed attention. It was overgrown. Other issues which I want to come back to, main day response, the uses in the neighborhood that were not compatible with the MDR, access to Webster Point, and train trestle safety. So we're going to put a pin in these because I'm going to come back. So I guess I would ask Councillor Wingard and Gardner if you think I've missed any overarching theme here. And you can say yes.
I don't think you've missed anything. I think that really captures it. I think there were a number of people that expressed that their concerns didn't fit neatly within one slot. So some of these things, you know, disorderly stuff and some property issues kind of blend together. So,
okay, I'm going to continue on. I think the other thing that was interesting when we went through this was understanding that this has been going on for a very long time. And also that there is most definitely an appreciation for the mixed use within the neighborhood, that many people felt it brought a vibrancy to the neighborhood. So immediately after, let me just, the meeting, I convened the town in an internal team that included the public safety director, Mitch, with code planning, life safety, police department, and wanted to really kind of look at the items that were on the list. So we have always had a response-driven code department, both life safety and code enforcement. We had a few issues in the neighborhood. We respond to all of our issues kind of the same way. We look at the risk to public safety or to the environment, which kind of gives it priority. And as long as it's not creating a really bad situation, we would move to an effort to get voluntary compliance. And sometimes that can be done with one visit, and sometimes that takes multiple visits. There were 3 open code and life safety properties with open code and life safety complaints when we met. So we continued with those, but we also took a more proactive approach. If people were concerned about property maintenance, we really wanted to go through the neighborhood and see, were there places that people weren't complaining about specifically, but that were in fact a violation of life safety. We caught a couple of those, parking on the lawn. I think we had a couple of garbage issues, and we continue to make those more proactive approaches. Wintertime is a little bit tougher because you don't see what's happening quite as readily. Police department had already stepped up patrols in the region because of the community's interaction with our community policing director. I think counselors saw those emails that were going back and forth. So as a result of that, we were already doing a more proactive patrol through the neighborhood. We have continued that. Speed violations, stop sign, making sure people stop. Understand that that is going to look different for different people because we are not there all the time. So it's kind of a hit or miss, and we try to mix it up so you maybe don't know when we'll be there. And we finally were able to get the town arborist to deal with some trees in Webster Park. So the next steps, from a staff perspective, I am proposing, and we have underway in our planning process. First, we're going to post a formal report on the website with a link that we'll send via postcard to the stakeholders, so everybody can see that what we heard and what we plan to do. We continue our proactive code and life safety inspections and police patrols. We are going to reach out to Bangor Area Comprehensive Transportation System, and also with some other equipment that we have from the police department to try to collect data. Some of this is hard to get in the winter time, so we're probably going to be aiming for some data collection before school is out, and then again in the summer, and then maybe again in the fall. So we'll have some comparatives. Police department and public works are going to start a formal evaluation of the streetlights. We know what we have there for streetlights. We know the wattages of streetlights. However, at night, we'll have PD go through and make an initial assessment, and then Rob usually goes through after those assessments are done to spot check them. That may result in attempting to move a streetlight. It may result in a suggestion that we add a streetlight, or we may want to take a streetlight away. Whenever you start adding streetlights, usually some people are happy about that and other people are unhappy about that. So there's quite a process that Rob goes through when we make those decisions. We will continue the ongoing main day planning with our UMaine landlords. We are working right now with planning and the special projects intern to create some changes to the website and a flyer that will be bundled up with rental registration packets that have information about kind of venting in Orono, also known as, what do we expect? What are the things that other people might not know? Our hope too, I think Mitch talked about a desire to have that flyer and website information be at a macro level and more inclusive to work for people who are just new to town to also get that. So when we get a deed transfer for a residential property, we'd be able to ship that out as well. Then also establishing internal landlord staff working group, which we have talked with council about. And there's already a planned paving of the Martin Park path. That's something that Rob had planned to do with miscellaneous paving. It all depends on weather and how much the path dries up and timing as to when that happens. So these are the things that, as a staff, we're saying we have the internal capacity to do. Our plan would be a streetlight evaluation or data collection. We'll come back to council for discussion because that would take more resources. So the next steps that I've identified for council would be, we've got a FY23 budget process coming up that includes discussion of a 5-year capital plan. And I would suggest that we take some of the suggestions from this list and add them for your discussion. A couple of them are already on the capital plan, much like the paving of Martin Park was on our internal improvements plan. Some of them are very large infrastructure requests, like the bridge between Webster neighborhood and the village across the river. So that might be more of a comp plan discussion, but I think that that capital plan discussion is the time when you could say, this should be a priority. We should add this for discussion at a later date, or this might be something that will kick in for consideration when the comp plan process comes along. Then there are some other issues that, quite frankly, Rob has been working his way through. And it's when you talk about speeding traffic and traffic that is not stopping at stop signs. Some of that is indicative of the infrastructure we have in place. Some of it is you have a fairly decent sight line and you're in low traffic areas and you have so many stop signs, people will not stop. Doesn't make it safe, doesn't make it right, just is what we see with normal behavior. So we are looking at things like, would it make sense to put some of the solar flashing stop signs out? Would it make sense in some areas to be able to connect them to existing power supply? We don't know. We need to look at that. But each one of those are about $1,500. So that's not something that we just have room to put a bunch up in. We would want to have a policy discussion with council about how you would want to approach that. The other option that we have is we're getting ready to put pavement markings back out to bid at some point here. Do we want to add 25 slow, 25 to get people to slow, to remind people to slow down or stop ahead signs in the pavement marking? So those are things that we could talk about. They have long-term budget implications, and they would be kind of a shift in an increase in our service level. We would want to have a conversation with council and probably prioritize what would make sense to start with or not. As I was telling Councilor Perry, sometimes even though the research might not support something as being super effective, it can be something that at least better communicates an expectation. So we feel like that is more of a council discussion as opposed to a staff discussion. So the other items that I had, I want to go back to the other items. I'm thinking in the report, I would like to use this opportunity to do a little bit of education with the staff about the first two issues. There was really a thought, I think, in the room at the meeting that the town and the university don't really respond to Main Day, that Main Day happens and all the stuff just kind of happens. And the reality is there's an awful lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. And so I am thinking that a well factually based, not defensive educational piece about what we do and how people could help perhaps prepare for Main Day might make a little bit of sense. The other piece that was an interesting discussion is the concern that there are uses in the neighborhood that are not compatible with the medium density residential zone. And when we look at that, the uses that they're looking at are the multiple unit apartment buildings. And the way it works is those back before it was zoned medium density residential, those apartment buildings were there and in use. And then the zone came after that initial use, which makes it a legally non-conforming use. So we cannot zone the existing multi-unit apartment buildings out of the MDR. They have a right to be there. If they stopped being used that way, then they can't go back, but they have a right to that. And
Just, may I, Terry?
Definitely.
Are you allowed to significantly modify a non-conforming use?
as long as you do not make it more non-conforming.
So there are some buildings in that area that had significant additions. Well, I remember when they were building them, so I would guess it was after it was designed, it was designated as medium density. But, I mean, that's history.
Yeah, if they tried to pull a permit now to do that, we would not allow that.
Okay.
If they pulled a permit to increase the size, but they were putting a garage in.
Yep.
Then I think they probably could do that
That makes
unless they didn't have enough of a setback or something like that.
But if I have a 4-unit non-conforming use and I want to put an addition on and add 2 more units to it, that would not be allowed.
That is not allowed.
Okay.
That is not allowed.
I think that's a good message to share with folks as you
It's,
get back to them.
I thought we could maybe just use these as 2 kind of additional kind of notes. The other piece that we're looking at with this that might come back to town council as an other item, Kyle is trying to think about how we could incentivize some of these non-conforming uses to do more in the neighborhood of buffering or, you know, things that might assist with the impact in the conflict of use. So he's working on that in the back of his mind. As soon as we come up with anything, we'll definitely let you know. The unfortunate thing is at this point, most of the time when we give an incentive for something like that, or when we want somebody to do something like that, the incentive we give is greater density. And we don't want to do that at this point in the MDR. So that's something that we are working with. We're just not coming up with success at this time. We're going to try to do some more research. The last issue, or the third issue, is access to Webster Point. This is a continuous issue for us. And by Webster Point, we mean the development offshore drive down at the end of North Main Avenue. When I came in to the town after the project was initially approved, they were in the process of tearing down a very unstable side of the old mill. And a lot of the work had already been done in terms of what was going to happen in the future. We then, before it was built, ended up with a change request that came from the developer that instead of these two condo towers, they were going to do 2-unit attached homes. When all of that was decided, we hadn't really dug into the landscape. None of the site work had really been done yet. And they did the demolition of the mill and the site work almost simultaneously. It kind of, the demolition started it, and then they kind of moved into the site work. Initially, we were supposed to have a little park as you enter Webster Point, and there was going to be a trail that went along the river, and then it was going to end in this lookout point where there was a piece of the old foundation that looked like it would be a wonderful place. When they got into the VRAP, the excavation and then filling the land, they figured out very quickly that what they thought would be a nice place to land was really a very dangerous place. And so our trail is a trail to nowhere. And without getting into a long discussion tonight, one of the things that I think is frustrating to people who live in the Webster neighborhood and at Webster Point is this undefined, unknown use down there. And I think town council should really have a conversation about what we want to maintain. And do we want to maintain a trail that takes people right in front of other people's homes that goes nowhere? The answer might be yes, but I think it's worth a conversation. That came up at the meeting.
So was the concern from residents who don't live at Webster Point that they can't have access to the shore there?
So yeah, I think that's what we heard at that meeting,
Yeah.
We also, Mitch has routine, about every other month, gets a call from somebody from Webster Point. And so I think with exactly the opposite. So I think what would be helpful is if we defined whatever that definition was. And then we could come along and use appropriate infrastructure to then try to get the behavior that we want. And then the last is just around train trestle safety. I think there was a thought that we should work a little bit with the infrastructure to keep people off the train trestle. It's very dangerous. We've seen the unfortunate situation, especially when alcohol and train trestles just do not mix. And the reason this is on another item is that we don't have any control over that. Staff has not had a lot of success lobbying the railroad to make changes. I don't know if this is a campaign that council wants to undertake, or if council is okay with the status quo. So the reason, you stop my share, that I wanted to talk to council first is that I didn't want to be in a situation where I put a report back out to the community and that said, this is what I think council needs to do, and these are what I think the next steps should be, if I was missing something that council wanted to do, or how council wanted to respond, or if I was overstating and saying just the opposite, that there were things that council didn't want to take on. So I'm looking for your guidance before I send this back.
So who would like to weigh in on it first? Henry?
I have a thought, but
Okay.
Megan was also at the meeting, so I want to defer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a really concise summary of, there was quite a volume of stuff at the meeting, and not to say like there were not to say that there are a lot of things to complain about in the neighborhood, but rather, and as Jeff alluded to earlier, like so many of them are sort of overlapping and interlocking. And there's also, a very natural, for someone who's just on the public side of things, like there's a very natural kind of like folks maybe not really understanding what things are covered by what aspects of town government or town staff. So that was all. So, you have overlapping concerns, and then some of them, a resident might think, well, this is a police concern, but it's actually a public safety concern, or it's a parks and recreation concern or something, And so I think that being able to kind of concisely summarize all these things and also give indicators of like how these things are going to be addressed is great. I also think that in addition to kind of, Sophie, you talked earlier about information or using the report and what we put on the website as a way to educate. And I hope that we can, go even a little bit further than that with additional education about how to contact the right people to address your complaint. Because one of the things that we heard a lot of from residents was like, I don't want to call the police over this, or I don't want to, tie up OPD over this issue, or, or whatnot. So being able to continue educating about the ways in which residents can get, a prompt response from the town by accessing the appropriate channels, I think it would be great as well.
I will tell you that wasn't long after this meeting, I got an email on a Saturday night, I think it was like 8 o'clock, with somebody with a concern. And I was able to flip that to the right department and get an immediate response. And the start of the email came in was, I don't want to bother you, but you said. And I was like, it's working, right? It's working. And I really think that although we've got Webster as the name on this report, and that's the neighborhood we met with, so many of the things that we see and so many of the ideas that are coming out of this are going to work across the community. And so the fact that they were willing to come out and share with us, I think makes a big difference, and it's helping us hopefully provide better service in the community.
One of the things that I heard was not necessarily the concern about rentals and non-conforming units, but about the transfer of use from full-time residential to rental residential in conforming buildings. So that, a house that was formerly a family's home has been turned into a single unit rental. I don't know how we address that. And I don't ever want to deprive anybody of their ability to use their property in the way that they, invest in their property in the way that they want to. But that is a concern that we've heard more than once, right? And so it's not just about grandfathering these very few non-conforming buildings, but it's about managing or planning for the integration of conforming rental units with residential units. And I don't know how we have that conversation, Sophie, but I think, and I don't think that's unique to the Webster neighborhood either. I think that's something we have to.
Well, I think that my understanding, or what I was hearing from that particular concern, and it was a concern back when I lived in that neighborhood, I think it's been a growing concern for a while, is really around the sale of properties to out-of-state parents who then give them to their children to live in and let their children rent the bedrooms to friends and make, income or pay the mortgage that way. And I mean, my hope is that trend would be sort of mitigated by our efforts. We've been having conversations about that already in terms of having a local property maintenance person. So even if the parents are living out of state, the people who actually own the home are living out of state. that there is a local property maintenance individual. I guess that if parents really wanted to get around that, they could put the house in the kid's name. And again, like Jeff is saying, I'm really not sure how we, or if we would want to regulate that, but yeah, so I mean, I'm hopeful that having local agents would make a big difference.
I wonder if we really, when you talk about integration and change, I think we start that with putting the expectation out there about how we expect people to behave, right? Because is it really the impact of somebody paying a monthly premium to a bank or to a landlord that is creating a conflict? Or is it the behavior that you're seeing in people who are engaged and committed in the community versus people who maybe aren't looking at it that way? And so I think about when we try to change culture within our staff, that's not something that changes overnight. And I think you build little by little. And I think creating an expectation by sending out, this is kind of what the town's expectations are for behavior. I also think, and I had a conversation with student life staff about it's time to probably send out another round of the You're in a Neighborhood material that goes to University of Maine students. I think we probably need to look beyond University of Maine, although it's in our backyard. We're seeing Eastern Maine Community College folks seeing custom kiddos too. So I think the answer might not be a home run, Jeff. It might be many little things that we do. And I think we're also seeing more of these neighborhood Facebook groups pop up. And if we could encourage more of the neighborhood community building, which I'm not sure is a town, that the town has the role of knitting the garment, but maybe we could put some yarn and some needles in front of people, right?
No, I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I do think we need to be aware of it. And I think maybe in our report to the community to say, we are aware that this is a concern. And while we don't have a tool or an instrument that addresses that concern, we have a lot of, like you said, a lot of other factors that are sort of building up to the point where we can mitigate some of these.
Excuse me, what was the specific concern that you want to say? We understand this is a concern.
I think, Lori, it was about the changing character of neighborhoods from primarily owner-occupied residences to tenant-occupied residences. And that without changing the buildings into non-conforming subdivided buildings, but keeping the buildings whole as rental units rather than keeping the buildings whole as owner-occupied residences. People shared a concern that they were really worried that their neighborhood was becoming one of short-term tenants rather than long-term residents.
And I think that connects with the discussion we had last week about affordable housing. When you take a single family home and it becomes a multi-student, for lack of a better word, property, that's a house that a family could be in.
Well, as far as affordable housing, if a group of students, even if abiding by the rules of having only 3 people who are not related living together, end up being willing to pay more per bedroom than a family of the same number of people where there's only 1 or 2 adults working to support the people in the house. So that's one of the challenges, even if it were to remain as a single family home as a rental in a college town. But I think, Sophie, it's wonderful that you went to the school, and I think it's a great idea to send out more of those pamphlets or some kind of basically soft education on how to behave, right? Because the goal, when you say when the people who live there want it to feel like a community, means that they want the people who live beside them to treat them with respect and be polite and consider that this is not just a temporary living space, but this is a home. And so sometimes the people who come into a community might need to get reminded, I guess. So thank you, Sophie, for that. I guess I wanted to, if this is the time to circle back, and I was very glad that, Sophie, for you to give the summary of the Webster Park, or the Webster Point idea with that was supposed to be access. And that you've heard from both the people in there that are saying, why are people coming here? And the people who don't live there that want to walk in there and say, why isn't there access? And what do you have some plans on how to go forward with that? And if this isn't the right time, then we can bring it up after we discuss this other stuff.
When I was chatting, I think the point I wanted to make is it's a conversation that I think council needs to have. And I think that there need to be more than just Mitch and I here to have that conversation. And I think it is something that council would want to have the documents and the agreements from the initial conversations and the minutes of the planning board. I think it's a bigger conversation, but I do think it's important when we talk about the Webster neighborhood, because that conflict at this moment is a conflict of expectation based upon things that people have heard and realities. So I think council just needs to have a discussion and decide how it wants to move forward. But I don't think it's a quick one. And I think my staff and I need to pull that information together so everybody has the background.
So I'd just add that I really appreciate the summary. I heard good things about the meeting from people who attended, thought it was run very well. Jeff Lowe got a lot of compliments on how he facilitated it. I like the idea of getting back to residents with a report and breaking it down into, these are the things that we're working on right now. These are the things that council is going to have to look at for the future, but not long-term future, for this spring. And then the education piece on a couple of the issues that mentioned, I think that's a great way to respond.
And there's a lot to digest. I kind of typically come from a different approach on these types of things, because were there anybody from the other side that gets that they have to rub with? Were any of those people available to be here to kind of have the conversation, or were they just not really wanting to be part of that conversation?
So I will say, within the meeting, there were most definitely some divergent points of view that were held. And when I look at the list that I gave you, so I was prepared, right, but when I look at the list is of things that people have concerns about. And I think from the other side, quite honestly, they're not having maybe some of these concerns. But I don't know that invalidates them. And sure, there were some things that were brought up at the meeting that, like, I don't want to have screens in Webster Park. I don't think we should have computers in Webster Park. I don't like the story walk because they're electronic screens, and they're not. But so I mean, that didn't make my list, because not that person was fully entitled to their perspective and their point of view, and we wanted those comments. But I think where we are right now is we tried to pull them together and say these are things that make sense and that we can move forward with. So
it makes sense. I think for me, it's like I kind of keep cataloging these things that come from specific neighborhoods, and I'm glad that we're probably getting to that point where people learn to go to get your information first, because we can go back to that piece of art that's an educational piece, that rumors flew through that neighborhood that could have been very simply asked. And I think maybe the first step with that individual emailing you saying, I don't want to bug you, but that's a great first step for this. So
if the only thing we did was get people to feel comfortable to lodge the complaint, which we try really hard not to use the word complaint because that sounds bad, right? Concern might sound better. That is what trips all of our data collection. And so we're just trying to work at bringing some of those in. You know, I think the other thing that's important is we had a historic trash complaint happening, going back and forth, that we were trying to get some voluntary compliance with. I think with that landlord sitting in the room, hearing how that trash issue impacted other people, we had a complaint come in and we issued a final get your act together notice. And we've been very clear, next time that happens, $50 a can. And it hasn't happened that we're aware of since. So I think that landlord heard the concern. I think he was probably getting close to that place anyway, but has issued notice to his tenants that they're going to get fined. So, I mean, I think there is some communication without conflict.
And I like actually the layout of this. It makes sense the way you kind of explain it as little bits. It's going to take time, and I'm sure they understand that it's going to take time to kind of get things kind of smoothed out a bit.
And Terry, to your point, I think it's important for us, for the town, to continue to build trust with residents, because and I know that, Webster neighborhood does sometimes make a lot of noise. And I say this again as a former resident and friendly with many of these folks, because it is kind of a little pressure cooker. I mean, there's really a lot of full-time residents and college students kind of right up against each other. And there's always going to be conflict for that reason. And I think I understand that as, on the council side of things, I understand that it's frustrating to feel like residents are always suspicious of the town or thinking the town's not doing anything, because I know that our staff is working so hard and that we are talking about these issues and trying to make change and trying to work with the university. And sometimes those efforts aren't visible or they're not noticed. And so I get the frustration. The other side of that, though, is that it is incumbent upon us to build trust with those residents, because there were residents in that room who said, I'm really glad you're having this meeting. It all sounds great. Chief Lowe, you're doing a great job. The town, it seems like you guys care. But I was in a meeting just like this 10 years ago, and it's the same problems, and there were folks who were kind of wistful, saying, I hope things change, but I'm not holding my breath, because I feel like the town's been telling me this and that is going to be addressed for a long time. And those things aren't really addressed to the way that I would like them. And then there were other people who were saying, I've lived in this neighborhood for a very long time and I have seen progress in these particular areas. So I think that our continuing to really try to make outreach to residents, not just at Webster Park, the Webster neighborhood, but across town, in these neighborhoods, particularly where there's conflict between renters and long-term year-round residents, and to continue being as transparent as possible in our efforts is really going to go a long way to making people comfortable. I think that people are willing to be more patient with you as the wheels of government turn slowly, if they understand that you're doing something. It might just not be happening lickety split, but it's in progress. And so continuing to communicate and be transparent, I think, is really important in building trust.
My hope would be, once this report goes back with kind of a plan, if people have concerns with the plan, they're going to let me know. And if it's stuff I can deal with at the staff level, we'll make adjustments. If it's not at my level, then we'll schedule another time to have a specific conversation about the area of concern with the town council. So I'm not seeing this as the end.
Right,
but
right. And I think also another thing that you may have alluded to it is kind of looking at other neighborhoods. For example, I'll just use my neighborhood as an example. We choose based on, there's a segment of housing that's down below us, that it's, the landlord really is kind of just buying stuff and really not keeping full tabs on it. But what we chose to do when we had issues was 3 of us from different houses would just go and just nicely talk, say, so this is what's happening, you know, like you come riding up the hill fast, and we've got 2 or 3 little kids, now we got more kids. Could you just be aware of it? And they're good. They're typically good about it. So I think of learning from each other neighborhood, what they're doing to kind of deal with that stuff.
And I get it as I experience turnover in staff, right? That we have a culture that has always been very, very tight. And as we get more and more people, we have to re-educate. We have to figure out how to make it work again. And I get that in our communities, we have a lot of turnover. And so we have some people who are turning over all the time and other people who are here. So, yeah, I think, I hope that that's a plan, at least for this community.
Anything else from anybody on this?
I just have one thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So my brain is on housing, and I attended that Maine Municipal Association housing panel last week, and they talked about something called Community Solutions Grant, which is up to $500,000 to municipalities, and it's a matching grant. So, but you can use town land as part of the match, and I immediately thought of Webster Point as a place that had, the plan had been to build more housing, and the developer didn't build it all. And so there's some spots there at Webster Point. And so since we're at the Webster Point, when I heard that this was a possibility, I thought the easiest place to be able to do the community solution of creating more housing is a place where we were already planning to put housing recently, much more recently than other places that we've talked about. So anyway, I just bring that up because the more housing we get where there's already housing, the more chance we have can put families with kids, especially if we have those houses designed, or housing units to be more preferential to that. Of the top 50 municipalities, population municipalities in the state of Maine, Orono has the lowest percent of children living in our town. So I think that the people who are saying, we are disappointed when it goes from a single family home to a rental, the disappointment also is that we are looking to be a town that's more comfortable as a home for families, and certainly that neighborhood. And one of the ways to welcome more families is to have more buildings. Anyway, so there's my suggestion, is that maybe we could look into that and look at those lots in the Webster Point neighborhood as possibilities of places where we could add housing, especially if there's federal money available to match us. And the value of our land is so high in Orono that would be a significant match. Plus, there's all the utilities are already there, because those lots are before where the houses were built. It's between Penobscot Street and the houses that were built there. So there's my input.
Great, thank you. Sophie, did you need anything else from us on this? Good to go. Okay, so let's move on to the next item, implementing regular community conversation groups with key staff.
So this is actually an idea that Jeff, Flo, Mitch, and I are talking about, and I'm hoping Jeff might turn on his video so we can see him. He can be part of this conversation. So we had, we kind of looked at Webster. That idea came up that, we had a community that was reaching out to council and had some concerns. And then the thought was, well, maybe we should do another one for Sailor, and another one for Tough End, and another one for the Basin, and another one for the properties off College Avenue, right? So and then we started thinking, the goal here is really to encourage communication between our community and staff, right? To understand what the needs are in the community or the concerns are, to give people a low threshold opportunity to connect, to learn more about issues that they might be interested in. And so the idea that we've come up with is, instead of having these geographic centered conversations, and there might be a time when we're getting a lot of feedback from another community, another neighborhood that we want to do that. But just in general, why not schedule 4 community forums a year? We're thinking one in May, one in September, one in November, one in February. That was kind of strategic around school coming and going, and times of the year that would help us with budgeting, times of the year that would allow us time to plan. So the idea being, it would be, we would bring key staffers in, public works, public safety, economic development, maybe the library, and parks and recreation, and just have an open conversation with the community. So what I have heard is, it feels like when I say we've talked to the landlord group, the feedback I got from that is, well, the landlords have access to you, Sophie. Why can't I get access to you? And the fact of the matter is, anybody can get access to me. My email, my phone number, and my office are all known. However, I understand that reaching out to the town manager or the director of public safety or public works director, who are all we are busy people, might not be comfortable. And so the thought being that we try these 4 meetings, and then we evaluate whether or not we got people. The other thing that I would suggest, we're gonna make some modifications to the annual report that's coming out, as well as to the website, to make a very concise, if you have an issue, here's who you call, because you shouldn't have to navigate that. But also, we could add in virtual meetings if we needed to. It's a little easier. You don't need to have as much, the logistics behind it aren't quite as cumbersome. But the thought being, probably we'll have to talk amongst the 3 of us around kind of the facilitation method that you want to use. Our experience is, when you just open the door and say, come talk to us, people get really angry with us. They want us to have an agenda and a purpose. So I think we're gonna have to feel our way through that. But we were hoping to start with the first meeting in May. And I just we're looking to try to get it in before students leave, but given the number of students that we're seeing staying with us year round, it might, if we have to go a little bit later, I think that would be okay too. But looking to see, we had talked about individual neighborhood groups. This would be open to kind of everybody. Wanted some feedback.
I love the idea. I do. I think that, well, given that it takes off and that people really engage with it. The only thing I think that I would have concern was if somebody just made it an opportunity to match, and that would not be, wouldn't be a good thing. But that would be probably my own concern about that. Any thoughts from anybody?
Well,
Yeah,
the
I
only,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
the only thing I liked about the neighborhood meetings is you're getting a different group of people each time. Whereas a general community meeting, you might get kind of the same core of people each time. And but I don't know, I guess we could try it and see what happens.
So
The only other thing would be controlling the number so that you don't have 200 people here versus the 35 to 50 that might be a more comfortable group to work with.
I think the way we had talked about was to set it up with a RSVP. And if we ended up with 200 people that really wanted to talk with us, we might have to do it on several nights, but we could work them through. We could think about a hybrid option. We could think about other ways to do it. I do think it's important for these to be open meetings. And if we're having a specific issue in a community, I think one of the things we've done, if council is willing to allow staff to kind of try this, would be, we might, if we're hearing a bunch in the Sailor neighborhood, we might reach in and try something like that.
I think it goes back to also what you were just saying about if you do things not just in Webster Park, if you look at other places having similar issues, you can do it all at one. Anything else?
Well, I think I heard you describing it as being somewhat different than the Webster neighborhood meeting, where you're using it as an opportunity for some two-way information from the citizens who come in, but also an opportunity for staff to talk about some of the things that are going on within their departments or that could have. Yeah, I like that.
Meg?
Yeah, I think that just from an accessibility standpoint, this is great because, you know, kind of what you were alluding to, Sophie, I think that there could be a lot of barriers for people. Like there's a different feeling between a meeting, I've been invited to a meeting versus, you know, and a lot of different people sharing the same concerns as me are going to be there versus calling the town manager, coming to the town manager's office or emailing the town manager, showing up to a council meeting just to say something at public comment by yourself. I mean, like psychologically, I think those are two very different things. So I think that this is great because it probably makes, you know, all of those avenues for residents to give feedback to staff, to council, to ask questions, to lodge complaints, all of those options are still available, but to add this additional option that might remove some barriers for folks who are hesitant or reluctant or unsure about interacting with town government. You know, what's the harm in just kind of going to a meeting and then seeing what happens? You know, it might be way more accessible for some folks, which I think is great. And I think that the way to make it the most successful might really be like branding, as opposed to it being something that like people are like, oh, I thought I heard there was some meeting and it happened and I missed it, you know. Oh, but if you're like branding it so that it's something people expect every year, like, oh, it's the quarterly convo or something, you know, like, oh, hey, the quarterly convo is coming up. Like, are you coming? Are you going to go? Because we had that thing we wanted to talk about. You want to come with me? That if it's something that is a little bit catchy or branded in a way that people will remember that it comes up every few months and, you know, be encouraged to kind of drop in as opposed to forgetting that it even exists or hearing about it too late or something like that. And I know we have some very creative, cute social media friendly folks on staff who can make that happen.
So Chief, did I adequately describe what the thought was here?
Yeah, I think so. And there certainly seems to be support behind it, which I don't think I need to speak very much to since we've already got some backing. It's in my mindset, it's hard to say that our services are community oriented if we don't know what the community is looking for. So it's another way to validate what we're doing. So.
And Jeff, does that address some of your concerns?
Yeah, it does. I think if people are nervous about coming to a general meeting, you know, we might organize them thematically rather than geographically. Like,
Yep.
you know, this is our time to talk about traffic issues or safety issues or whatever. But I think throwing it open at first to see what the community's concerns are is really a good idea.
But I also hear what Sophie's saying about that people want a little bit of structure. But so, and I hear what Tom's saying about having people feel like they had a specific, their specific neighborhood was being focused on. So maybe if we don't go with a neighborhood, just as Sophie said, that the things that came out of this meeting will help our town serve our communities, all of our communities better because of the things we've learned. So perhaps making the agenda not be on a neighborhood to start, but have it be on a cluster of issues that we want to hear from people. And it doesn't prevent them from saying, oh, and I also want to talk about this while I've got you here. But then it'll give some kind of boundary so that we don't bump up to what Sophie told us already, is that people want a little bit more structure.
Thank you. Anything else? Great. So I'm gonna pass the baton off to Tom.
There you go. So moving on to Finance and Operations Committee, we have two items, I guess. And item number one is proposal to increase council pay. And Eagle provided us with some interesting information.
Yes, so, fine. Here we go. So just to recap, because we actually have quite a few people in attendance, which is kind of cool to see. This item came up, Councilor Robertson wanted to just evaluate the potential of increasing council pay. Currently, the Orono town councilors make tons of money. $1,000 a year for a councilor and $1,200 a year for the council chair. The thought wasn't that anybody expected to get rich. I'm just trying to recap the conversation you had in workshop, but rather wanting to make sure that we didn't create a barrier that people couldn't afford to be a counselor if they so chose. And so from a legal perspective, the council, the town charter allows the town council to establish its rate of pay. The last time it was initially established back in 1969 when the charter was passed, and increased in 1980 to the rate that it is currently at. If you applied CPI to that, it would be more like $3,300 a year. So we all agreed that CPI isn't always an indicator of how the town of Orono has addressed wages. And instead, I was asked to go out and gather some information about comparable communities. And while I would love to take a lot of credit, I had an idea, and I have a very capable intern right now who did an awful lot of researching for me. We reached out to a number of communities. When we talked at council meeting, you were really interested in comparable population. And so I looked at communities that are between 7,000 and 15,000. So 4,000 less than us, 4,000 more than us. The information I got back is that Winslow pays their council the absolute least. Councilors and council chair get $600 a year. That's actually done $50 a meeting. And so they meet only once a month. Yep. And then Rockland just this year, this fiscal year, changed their rate. They now make $4,000 for council, $4,500 for the council chair. And Tom Luttrell told me that they are, they index that to the consumer price index, so it increases by CPI every year from this point forward. When we look at the list, you will see that Rockland is a pretty significant outlier at this point. The majority are in the $1,000 to $1,500 range, most of them at $1,000. And $1,200 for the council chair also seems like the majority of them being in that place. So I do have some charts to kind of help bring that home. Let me share my screen. So this is by least to most pay. The two bars in the very middle are Orono, and I've tried to show them with a different pattern in the middle so that you don't get lost. but you see, we're kind of right where everybody else is, and then up a little bit on the other side. And then I also, just to show you that the population is all over the map there, because I kind of didn't know if it was population based. And that's what I've got.
Reaction, comments?
Yeah, to get a better understanding though about, and how we had this conversation about whether or not people could afford to do this. I'd be curious though, to even figure out, like you just said, the Winslow does one meeting a month, whereas we have every week. What do these other communities look like? Their commitments and subcommittees and all this other stuff for, I don't know if that's even doable, but.
Oh, anything is doable. Anything is doable.
I mean, I wouldn't want it to have all of them, but just like a few around us to see what that actually, what their time commitment is.
I would suggest that, I think, other than Bangor, you guys probably have one of the heaviest time commitments in this region. The other thing that I might suggest, I have no opinion about council's pay. That is truly a council decision. If the issue is about, does it make sense? Does the pay allow somebody to better participate? I think that angle is maybe one to think about, to like what is reasonable. I also think that council pay can be a very political discussion, and I think a lot of communities probably don't want to have that discussion in times of when, budgets are tight. But since I have been here, we've tried to go to less meetings a week, and it turned into more meetings a week or a month. 4 meetings, Monday meetings, and then the Thursday or additional day during the budget process for those 6 weeks tends to be the sweet spot. And every once in a while, we can drop a meeting out. When I look at that, I ran numbers, that's, at 15, if you think about, we have, as a town, have said we're not going to pay people less than $15 an hour, except in some of our seasonal positions. The $1,000 clearly doesn't even come close to meeting times. Even if you said we meet 2 hours a week, call it 52 weeks a year when we drop meetings out and for holidays. That I don't think it is unreasonable for council to be looking at an increase if that's what you think will make it better for people across all demographics in our community to participate.
Other comments, reactions?
I've actually thought a lot about this, and I think I'm gonna come out on the opposite side of the issue. I really look at this as volunteer work. And you can't equate the time spent with the amount of money received, because it's basically volunteer. And I have a hard time thinking that a $500 or $1,000 change is going to make much difference to people wanting to run for office. So for me, I guess I wouldn't try to block an increase, but I'm certainly not advocating for an increase.
I mean, I'll say that this was, there was a discussion about this a few years ago with Belfast, and it has come up perennially, and some communities have chosen to kind of take a step forward. I just want to say again what I said at the last discussion about this is, my impulse personally is to say, I don't want to take any more of the taxpayers' money. Like, I've made a decision that I am willing to sacrifice this amount of time to do this job in service to my community. But I also understand, that, and I see it as a volunteer position too. Having the luxury of volunteering, that is a privilege. And so when you talk about, and part of the reason, in fact, I would say maybe the only reason that I have the luxury as someone who does not earn a lot of money, I am not a person of means, and I never have been. And for me, the ability to be able to participate in Maine's political sphere in general, whether it's this or, for Maine Women's Lobby or whatever, that's a lot of volunteering of time that's really only made possible by the fact that we have some flexibility with work, owning our own business, and that my husband has additional income from a part-time job. So, like, personally, I've already made this sacrifice and figured out how to make it work. And I'm fortunate that I was able to do that. But also, volunteering for your community, that is a privileged luxury. And when I look around the state at who holds positions, elected official positions from bottom to top, there's a lot of questions there about like how, this goes all the way up through the legislature. I mean, like, who are we electing to these positions? People who can afford to volunteer their time, whether it's that they have a unique childcare situation or a unique self-employed situation, or whether they just have money and they have time and the ability to do that. So again, I personally have already made this commitment that I, even though it's the money is not helping me really, like in the grand scheme of things, I've made this sacrifice to do this work. But I also think about people who really might not be able to, or might think that it's not something they can volunteer their time to because they don't have that luxury. I don't know. I again, like Tom said, is an extra $500 a year, $1,000 a year going to change somebody's mind? I don't know. But I also, we've made a commitment to think about and work on equity issues in this town and accessibility. And here's an opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I would like to keep thinking about this.
Anything else?
Yeah, I really appreciate Megan's comment about that we had made a commitment. We had a very short, a temporary or, a short-term group that advised us on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And certainly this is an issue that it's not inclusive for people who are not as lucky as all of us are. We all own our own homes. I don't know about your personal lives, but I don't know that what I do know of you, I don't think any of you have been without a house or without food for extended periods of time in your life. And that is, it's really important that our representative democracy has representatives that are in fact representative. And so I'm with Cheryl. I'm glad she put this on our agenda. And I think that the pay should be increased. And I was comfortable with the, I'm leaving now, so it's not about my personal pay. And maybe that makes it easier for me to say this in public, but I think that $3,500 is a reasonable amount. And that's significantly more than we get paid now. And I think that it's important to talk about what's reasonable. And so that when inevitably we who are being fiscally conscious about the big picture, how much money we spend on town things, when we get pulled back, at least we've started with something that remunerates this important job and supports people to spend the time to do what we do. We have more than the time we spend in the meetings. We read things in advance, we attend committees, we talk with the citizens, we talk with other people about how we might do our jobs better, and that's all of that takes time. So there's my pitch, is that we should come up with a number, and I think the number should be $3,500. And I'm willing to hear other people rebut that very high amount compared to what we're paying.
Points. Any other comments?
I just say I sort of fall more on Tom's side of the spectrum here, and we try to keep in mind that town doesn't really have its own money. We have taxpayers' money, and I would rather spend the taxpayers' money keeping the streets safe, well lit, and providing services to the community than increasing the pay of council. And that I completely recognize that I am in a position to say that not all my neighbors are in. Very fortunate to be able to give my time this way, but I just can't take from, I don't feel like I can take from the coffers to increase council pay at this time.
Well, Cheryl unfortunately was unable to be with us tonight. And I think we know what her position on this issue would be, and I'm sure it would be to at least continue talking about it.
Is there anything I can do that you need from me to help support future conversations, or are you now in a place that it's just talking about what you already know and coming to some?
The only folks in our area that are on immediate area are Hampton and Old Town. Is that correct?
Brewer?
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm sorry. In that case, I take it back.
I can look at other smaller Glenburn, Holden, Herman. So I'm not asking for more work. I just want to make sure that I am not, you don't need more from me. You could just schedule this for more discussion next month if you would like.
Yeah, I mean, Sophia, oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I was curious to see the list just because I wasn't quite sure what was going on in other communities in the state. But for me, so it was good to see that. But when I look at that list, normally when I see comparable community, like we're deciding like, how much are we going to spend on X or what are we going to do about Y? We look at comparable communities and we say, okay, well, let's all be in the same ballpark then. That makes a lot of sense. And I normally look at those lists compiled by staff for that reason. I almost feel the opposite though on this, where I looked at that list and I said, what that list tells me is that the entire state has this problem. And that's not, I'm not surprised by that information at all. I'm not surprised at all to learn that this huge list of comparable communities has the exact same structure. Because I think that it is endemic that, you know, I mean, look, the legislature is a great example. Like they really pay peanuts and people have to really be able to do that and commit that amount of time. So I don't think that I would need, you know, any more data pulled or anything from staff. But what I think could be interesting, and I don't know whether Cheryl maybe wants to do a little something with me on this, but I think it would be interesting for counselors to look into, like, to do some education about what are the equity issues, because right now we're all just working off assumptions. I'm working off an assumption that increasing pay could remove barriers for some people to run for office. And Tom's under an assumption that adding a little bit of pay is not going to measurably affect how many people choose to run for office. So that's both of us just assuming things. So I think that what council might really need to do to move forward, instead of kind of circling the drain on this and just kind of talking about it every month, would be to educate ourselves about what these issues are and how pay for government service impacts, you know, accessibility in terms of running for office. And I don't know whether that is an individual thing or whether we could send out links or things to each other, or whether we could volunteer to like talk about things that we've researched at a meeting, or how that would look. I would leave that up to the chair to decide, but I think maybe a little council education, self-driven council education could be helpful.
Good point. How would we like to structure that? Is that something that would be of interest to folks? If I get some research, there might even be national research out there, I suppose.
So I'm wondering if it's something you'd like to do, that I could have a Zoom with Counselor Gardner, Counselor Robertson, and just have a conversation, and I can tap some of my networks to see what might be
Good.
out there. Is that a good place to start? And then when we're ready, we'll bring it back. Does that also?
Yeah, I love to volunteer myself and Cheryl for extra work. I love it.
I think that's a
You
great
notice I
idea.
never, we never let you off the hook when you do that.
Okay, I think we have a next step. We ready to move on? Our next item is review of financials, and we've got a lot of material on that item.
So the first one was tax collection, and I sent an email to both Counselor Osher and Counselor Gardner with the new updated report through December 31st. Zach thought he could take a week of vacation and mess the whole timing up there. But then came back and quickly had it all done. So if you look, we from all of our outstanding real estate at this point, we have $6.4 million outstanding. We brought in about $241,000 so far in this period, and we look about 52% collected for this year's. The second half payment is due February 11th, 2021, 2022, sorry.
Is it the 10th or the 11th?
Updated that, 2/10/22. And I'll ask staff to make sure that they get that out on the board and make it well known. The other side of that is the treasurer's report. I'm taking it out of order here. But we ended the year, the calendar year, with $11.3 million in the bank, which was a decrease of about $655,000 from the beginning of the year. We would expect that we collect money in September, money comes in, and then we spend it in February, it comes back in, and then we spend it down. Our investments are, that gets updated after we get the statements, which we should get by the end of this month. So questions about treasurer's report? Now, my expectation is that council is going to, anytime they have a question about our finances, they're gonna let me know. Doesn't have to be in a meeting. When we look at our revenue and expenses, we always look first at tax collection because that's our biggest revenue generator. And then the other is revenue sharing. Everybody got a revenue sharing report in their initial packet. You will see that we are coming in ahead of projections. The report that you had shows that we brought in 1.5 million, which is about 61.41% collected for our budget. Over the weekend, we received January's check, which was another 244, which puts us a little over 70% collected. So we are ahead of where we would expect to be this time of year.
What I especially like on the you
The
shared
one
with
with
us
the blue is,
is where revenue sharing has gone in the last 5 years or 4 years. That's very encouraging.
so the thing that council wants to understand is our projection for FY '23, while the percent of the revenue sharing pot grows to 5% supposed to this year. We bring in quite a bit under the revenue sharing two category. We're one of the higher receivers in the state on that category for population. But that was because we had a really high mill rate. Our mill rate has come down significantly. And so I would expect that we're probably gonna just about level out this year. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's. I hope I'm
In that, given that projection, how does it play into the political climates coming up? Do you, I know, you can't do that, but I mean, given the past person and that has the potential of maybe getting back in.
So I try really hard as a manager. My job is to be nonpartisan. I can tell you that the previous administration was decidedly anti-municipality. I sat in meetings with the previous governor in Orono and was told that municipalities were more money always and pigs at the trough. So if that particular change happened, I would expect that we should expect the raids on revenue sharing to start. When I look at revenues, we have revenues coming in that look like we are ahead of projections, which is always good. It's not like last year when we were in the middle of a pandemic and specifically under budgeted revenues because we thought we were going to see a significant correction in the market. But overall, I think we're in pretty good shape. I remain incredibly concerned about where we're going to end up with the fire department expenditures this year. I know Chief Lowe is working really hard to try to mitigate what he can. And I know, but we just continue to have significant amount of overtime. And other than that, I thought we looked pretty good on the expense side. Some of the infrastructure lines looked overspent. That is a function of budget adjustments that have not been, that were entered after the end of the calendar year.
Sophie, on one of the pages, you gave some additional information in a little tiny box on the bottom right. And
Yes,
it showed accounts receivable for WPCF and the ambulance service. Is that fairly typical, that those amounts?
so those amounts look very typical. In fact, they look so typical, Tom, that I'm gonna go back and double check them. They look, the ambulance AR, that is, we're seeing that actually come down further than it has been in previous months. WPCF billed accounts receivable, that I think is very much a function of timing when the bills are sent out.
Or nothing to be
I don't think,
particularly concerned about at this point in
I
time.
don't think so.
Any other questions from folks on the material or anything more that you want to say on this topic?
The,
Sophie?
the only other, well, I'll let this topic, just in case there was something people wanted to talk about. But I just wanted to touch base on the audit.
We okay moving on to the audit?
So the in September, we had our field audit. And when the auditor left, they had everything they needed. And we expected to have an audit report in just a few weeks, at least draft financials that allow us to complete our pieces of the audit report. Our auditor faced the same issue that other companies are facing with regard to labor. And unfortunately, the field auditor that was with Casey, who was our lead auditor, tendered his resignation not long after they left. And so it wasn't just us, it was a lot of different clients. Connie and I kind of started pushing Casey a little bit. I understand that it's because they were lacking enough staff. They're trying to get staff on, but we really needed to get our audit in. So Casey also welcomed a brand new bouncing baby boy named Winslow on Friday. So I shared with Councilor Perry that we received the draft financial statements, and I want to just give you a high level review. And I turned around the management discussion and analysis with staff along with the notes to the financial statement. And we had 2 very minor comments for best practices that we responded to. Councilor Perry has reviewed the draft financials and has copies of that draft material. My suggestion is that at the next, after you guys actually get your audit books, we will do, as part of the Finance and Operations Committee, one of my more detailed overviews to actually dig into some things. And then if Councilor Perry wants to have Casey come talk to us, he absolutely could do that. Both you and Councilor Gardner, was it Councilor
Yes.
Gardner, talked with Casey this year. So the highest level, we have a net position of approximately $17,474,000. And that change increase, it was a net increase of $134,000. It was tempered with a loss in net position on the town side of $237,000 and an increase on the WPCF side of $371,000. One of the things I want to talk with council and dig into numbers on is to explain that $371,000, a lot of that has to do with the way the bond refunding was booked. And we still have the issue of our rates in general not meeting the long-term needs of the sewer system. We booked debt, new debt of $2,250,000 at the end of the year. That is for infrastructure. We have not booked any very much investment in infrastructure to offset some of the net position and impact that has on our fixed assets. So the place that everybody is most interested in is, what does this mean for fund balance? That seems to be the key. Our fund balance, our undesignated fund balance, we ended the year at $3,382,299, which is an increase of $1,534,017. So our undesignated fund went up. Our assigned fund stayed just about the same. There wasn't a ton of change there. And our restricted funds went way up because the bond proceeds that we held for infrastructure are all living in restricted funds. It used to be you could tie those restricted funds directly to the TIFs. Now a lot of that is being tied. Our TIF money actually went down a little bit our unrestricted. Or sorry, our restricted. bond issues went up. All in all, it looks like a very good audit report. Our findings were that we made a mistake with the calculation of the value of accrued compensated absences because that's okay. Because we pulled the right hours, what we had at year end, but we used current rates of pay as opposed to June 30 rates of pay. It was just the calculation. We ran an automated report. Staff has been educated and we won't do that again. I love it when a audit comment starts with, although it's immaterial. All right. And then the other comment was a little bit more cumbersome, and it has to do with the number of cash accounts that we have. So we have cash accounts across 2 financial institutions. The first has the majority of our business, but we also keep some money at UCU. It's the only headquartered financial institution in Orono. But also we do deposits, remote deposits. We need to have a place to take our cash. I'm not going to drive to Bangor to deposit at the first for our cash. So we put cash in UCU, write the check, and put it through the remote deposit. So that for UCU is 3 accounts. We have a CD, which gets our balance up to a place that is a nice, that allows us a little bit of good grace. We have a checking account so that we can write the deposit check through. And we have a savings account because you're required to have a savings account to do any of the other stuff. That savings account also allows our ambulance billing company to make direct deposits from their office in Southern Maine into our checking account, which works very well. So I don't want to mess up those accounts. The auditor is suggesting we need to collapse our accounts further. And besides those, we have 22 separate accounts in the first. One of the arguments that they're making is that we could get a better return if we consolidated the money within the first. That's not true because we have a bartered interest rate. And so it does not matter what the account balance is. Our interest rate is the same across all of our accounts, except for our site escrow, which we legally, well, we are not allowed to have bear any interest. So staff and I have gone through all of the cash accounts and have determined that there are a few that we're comfortable collapsing. We need to just finalize some guidance from our TIF attorney around whether or not we can collapse the 7 TIF accounts into 1 cash account and report for them on the just through the general ledger. So when I think about findings that you could potentially have, that's pretty minor. I think I will just commend my staff who do a great job.
When we met with them in the fall, Megan and I, they thought everything was ready for them. They were very pleased to see that, and we're very complimentary of the work the staff had done.
Right?
Yeah. So we'll look forward to seeing the official audit report and diving into it a little deeper when we do, and that should be within the next month or 2.
Yeah, so I did get an email from Casey saying that his son had been born and he was taking 2 weeks off, but he might be able to get this through management review. So I would say the turnaround at RKO is going to be at least 3 weeks, which then probably makes it 2 to 3 before we get the bills.
Anything else for us tonight?
So I have 2 items under the manager's report. The first is to just let folks know that we had a minor accident on Main Street today with a loader and a electric pole that they didn't like each other. It was the pole that allowed you to push the button and get across Main Street. So they, staff tried to, we had to get the pole down, we had to get the wires secured. When we did that, it reset to flashing only. The police have gone out and tried everything in our power to try to reset it. It's not gonna work. We're making calls right now to try to get somebody in to help us fix the issue. It is likely going to be a while, meaning not hours, but 2 days. And at this point, it is just gonna be on blink. You guys might get some complaints, and I apologize in advance. Because
Nobody hurt.
nobody was hurt,
That's the
and
important thing.
not even a scratch on the loader, just a little bit too much pressure.
Yep.
So the other thing, I wanted to just take a moment to talk to you about our after-school program. We went through kind of the first half to Christmas break, and wanted to just give you a little feedback about how things are going. So as you may recall, we raced at the very beginning of the school year and started this program like a week and a half, 2 weeks into the school year. The town has a contract with the University of Maine that provides labor for this program. But like most of our Parks and Rec programs, it's a pretty tight management collaboration. So we have staff over there very frequently, and we're in pretty much constant contact with the university with regard to this. The RSU 26 stepped up in a major way and are letting us use the Asa Adams gym and cafeteria. Sometimes it's the gym, sometimes it's the cafeteria, sometimes we can have both, sometimes we just have to stay out of one for a little bit and then we can use it. They have been great to work with, and we really appreciate what they've done. So the University of Maine has, at first we thought we were going to attack this with, depending on how many people we have sign up, is how many will staff to that level on an 8-to-1 ratio, minimum of 2 people. We quickly learned that from a staffing perspective, the idea that people will be flexible with when they work, and they might work 4 hours one week and 2 hours another week, that went out the window. The new labor characteristics tell us that we need to plan and give people a pretty static schedule. So they ended up with a lead and 3 staffers. So we have 4 people. If somebody doesn't show up, for they're sick, they have COVID, whatever, it can drop down, and we're usually pretty safe to go down to 3. We have an average kid per day right around 16. September it was 15, October 17, 16, 15, and then January we saw a big drop. It dropped to 10, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that there were the weeks without when the school was back, but a lot of parents weren't back at the university yet. Most kids we ever had, 22. These kids, 7. We have incurred $770 for snacks so far. So outside the base contract, about $770 in snacks. Megan and the university team, Sarah leading that team, have done an extraordinary job of finding all sorts of ways to repurpose, reuse stashes of supplies that we have over in the Keith Anderson house. So we haven't actually had to spend very much in equipment and supplies, some, but not a lot. So they have kind of each week they have a new theme that gets introduced on Monday. On Tuesday, library comes in and brings some books and reads. Wednesday, they have an educational structured activity, usually involving the theme and the books that were read. Thursday, they always have a creative structured activity, so arts and crafts type thing. Friday, outside activity, sledding, being outdoors. That can flip around a little bit. And there's always homework time and a snack time. we sent, the thing I thought was really interesting is their educational activities get split into two groups. K1 is one group, 4-5 is the other group, and then the kids in 2-3 kind of gravitate to which they are more comfortable in, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. University sent out a parent satisfaction survey. It went out to about 30 families. They got 9 responses back, which for a town survey is not too bad. They scored 6 10s and 3 9s. How did that? Scored 6 10s and 3 9s out of 10. Yeah, that works. With 10 being the best. So they're getting pretty high marks. The comments included that kids were getting frustrated when they got picked up because they wanted to stay longer. That kids go 3 days versus 5 days are upset because they find out what the other kids do. Staff were called helpful, attentive, kind, and responsive, and they clearly enjoyed working with kids, which is always a good thing to hear. And the comment was, this is a convenient and quality option for us. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. There was a bumpy start with this, as you would expect with any new program. And one of the things that Megan Matsilla, who supervises this for us, said is she really hopes that some of those kiddos will come back next fall now that we've got it kind of settled out. So it seems like a pretty good program, and at this point, my inclination would be to put it back in the budget for next year.
Great service.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
No there. Motion to adjourn? Unless anybody else has topics they want to bring up?
So moved. Great. A second from
Second.
Terry. Good.
Lori and Megan, thank you for joining us on Zoom. And we will meet again.
The 31st, and we've got the DEI report that
Yep.
we're going to talk about. And it's going to be a special council meeting because I've got final numbers for bargaining that I want to run by you before we start meeting, and a couple of grants that I need you to, we want to talk about the SAFER grant and also a grant for the police department.
Okay. Just wave your hands if you agree to adjourn. Thank you very much for being here. All
Thanks,
right.
Bill.